to the Horror Academic, and welcome to 2020. This is the first episode for the new year, and I hope everyone's had a good start. I want to start this year with a movie I had hoped to get to last year, but I didn't ran out of time, and it's just another one of my all-time favorites that has had an amazing Blu-ray release, so I think it needs to be celebrated. And for those of you who know me, yeah, I'm known as like the George Romero fan. I get that, but I'm also a big Sam Raimi fan. And probably Sam Raimi is the person who made me want to make films. So, how exactly did Sam Raimi lead to me wanting to be a filmmaker? Well, my friends, my little group, we were big fans of Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. And this was at a time when I was in high school before Army of Darkness existed. I know, I'm old, and it's hard to believe that there was a time before Army of Darkness, but it's true. And we were heavily anticipating the film. I mean, back then there were all these rumors. First off, it was called Evil Dead 3. Then it was called The Medieval Dead, and that was kind of like, oh. And then, slowly, things started to trickle in so that we knew what we were going to be in for. And one of the ways that we really knew about it, and me personally, as a big comic fan, and as someone who, back in the 90s, had a bin at a local comic shop, the guys at the shop would tell me when everything horror-related would come in, and one of those was the Army of Darkness comics. So this was the first way we knew the story. And I dug them out of my vault for you guys. So, Army of Darkness, the comic, which probably I should not have read. What I realized kind of when I was sitting in the movie theater, it tells you pretty much the entire story. It's based on the screenplay of the movie. So I knew what was going to happen, which today I probably would have been really, really angry about. But back then I was just so hungry for something Evil Dead that was new that I just, I read it over and over and over again. But so back to the main point of why I'm telling you about these wonderful comic books with really cool art and, good collector's items if you can find them out there. Like I said, I bought them new right off the rack. But in the back of the volumes, there were these little interviews with the guys who made the Evil Dead movies. So I knew a little bit about them, but not a ton. It was the 90s. It wasn't like we had the internet. All I had was Fangoria magazine to tell me these things. But one of the interviews, I'm trying to find it for you. Here it is. So one of these interviews with Bruce Campbell talks about growing up, making short films on Super 8 cameras with the guys who became the Evil Dead 3, really. Sam Raimi, Rob Tapert, Bruce Campbell. Writer, director, producer, and star. So he tells the story of how they made all these slapstick comedies and little, homages to Three Stooges, and, eventually that led to them making the film that was the kind of the fundraiser for Evil Dead. We'll get into that stuff more when we get to the Evil Dead Blu-ray, but I just wanted to kind of point that out, that these comics were not just, how I knew the story of Army of Darkness before most people did when we went to the theater to see that film, but it's what got me into the idea of, hey, if those guys can do it, why can't I make a movie? So I picked up a video camera one day and started making my own little spoof of the Evil Dead franchise, which you guys will never see. But anyway, point of the story, these are really cool comic books that gave away the entire story of Army of Darkness before I saw it in the theaters. But the good news was I still had a great time, and I love the movie today. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different versions of Army of Darkness out there. But let me give you a brief little bit of information. So, if you're not an Evil Dead fan, if you're not an Army of Darkness, Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell fan, the original Evil Dead was a runaway hit of an indie film. So it's a feature made by these unknown guys that is kind of lauded all around as one of the best new horror. And it's true. A couple years later, 6 years later, I believe, they get to make Evil Dead 2. thing is, here's a bunch of guys who made a horror film who really, really wanted to make a comedy. So what they did was they blended the two, and you get Evil Dead 2, which is a wonderful version of those two genres mashed up together. So, Evil Dead 2, even more massive hit than Evil Dead. So there was definitely plenty of people who were saying, well, when are you going to make Evil Dead 3? And from the minute pretty much Evil Dead 2 is out, that is the question that Raimi and Campbell and Tappert hear all the time. When's going to be Evil Dead 3? It took quite a while for them to get the money together, find the right production companies and distributors to work with, and eventually, after about 5 years after Evil Dead 2 comes out, we do finally see Army of Darkness. Army of Darkness hit movie theaters in '92, and yes, I was there opening weekend with my friends. And, obviously a VHS copy, which I unfortunately no longer own, big seller, big renter, and it's just huge. To the point that years and years down the line, late 90s, I'll say, is when Sci-Fi Channel really took off. By 2000, Army of Darkness is on like every weekend. It's true. It's probably why a lot of people, that's their introduction to the film, who did not know Evil Dead 2 first, or Evil Dead. In the TV world, Army of Darkness was way more accessible. So it was out there everywhere, and has a huge fan base on its own. And probably more than anything is why recently we got to see the end of the Ash vs. Evil Dead series, because people wanted kind of the sequel to Army of Darkness, which is, of course, like I said with Evil Dead 2, as soon as that's out, people want Evil Dead 3. Once Army of Darkness was out, and I remember when I started going to conventions, the big question out there was, will there be Army of Darkness 2 or will it be Evil Dead 4? And of course, none of it happened until the series finally came out a few years ago. So, all of that together. What else really makes Army of Darkness special? It is, I'm sure there's some of you out there that are like, but horror academic. Army of Darkness is a comedy. Army of Darkness is an action film. Army of Darkness is a medieval romp. I dare call it a horror film. Well, you're wrong. It's a horror movie. It's definitely a horror film. He's fighting the army of the dead in the past. Just because there's time travel, kind of a makeshift version of it, but still, it's time travel. That doesn't make it purely a science fiction film. The fact that it takes place in this kind of medieval time period that we don't even know when we really are, it doesn't make it a fantasy film only. All of these things together, yeah, he's still fighting the dead, so it's still a horror film. On my rewatches of it recently, I can definitely say I was surprised how many horror elements were definitely still evident in the film, in the story. So I debunk all of you, and I do claim Army of Darkness. Yeah, you might want to call it a sci-fi fantasy, blah blah blah, action, blah blah blah. It's a horror movie too. Might just not be one, but there's nothing wrong, especially when it comes as a sequel to a horror comedy, for it to be a mashup of sorts. I'm fine with that. But it's still a horror film. But I will say that while Evil Dead 2 made both Raimi and Campbell household names, if you were a horror fan, Army of Darkness is what made them kind of worldwide known beings, and definitely propelled Campbell to his status of, High Lord Supreme of the geeks. I'll give him that. Army of Darkness, more so than the other films, I feel, made that happen. If he had only ever done Evil Dead 2, we all still would have loved him, but I don't know if the world would have just known who he was, or if he would have gotten so much television and other films after it. So, Army of Darkness, definitely a huge effect on his career. And then think about the fact that, years later, Sam Raimi goes on to, not just make some other great films, but he ends up revitalizing the Spider-Man franchise at a time before the Marvel Cinematic Universe had happened. So you have to give Raimi extreme credit for that. So let's talk about the different versions out there of Army of Darkness. First off, I want to show you my Laserdisc. Unfortunately, this is just like many of the lasers that I've shown from this period, it's a straight transfer, essentially, of the tape. Yeah, I thought it had a commentary track, but It does not actually have anything listed. So this is the Universal, MCA Universal Laserdisc. No special edition here. The others, Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, got beautiful elite versions with many commentaries and trailers and behind the scenes and blah and all that. Army of Darkness, unfortunately, did not, probably because Universal ended up owning the distribution rights. So Raimi's production company is Renaissance Pictures. They partnered with Dino De Laurentiis' company to make Army of Darkness, and I think that probably opened up doors to make the film far more available than the others, but also kind of limited the abilities of certain companies to get the rights to make special editions at that time. We don't see that till later with Anchor Bay coming around. Speaking of which, the DVD special edition by Anchor Bay, they did have like a movie-only edition as well. This was the special edition that I recommend. This version, which is dated 99. This is the one that has, you know, the trailer intact. It's got behind the scenes footage looking at the making of the film, the special effects of the film. It's got, you know, commentary tracks, all the great stuff you expect from an Anchor Bay edition of pretty much everything, right? So Army of Darkness, Anchor Bay, it's one of their staples. They I think there was a period where Anchor Bay pretty much existed only on Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, but, you know, that's what I think. Let's see, what else we have? Oh, one of the things you do get to see once we get Anchor Bay having possession of the movie is there was the hugest rumor for years that there had been an alternate ending. And, you know, really like back in the day pre-internet, really what you had to do was to buy a bootleg VHS at a convention where someone had the work cut of the film, and it was grainy, it was dark, but you saw the other ending. Now, in the ending we all know from the theatrical release, you know, Ash ends up back in present day, he's back at working at S-Mart, and he fights a Deadite there. The alternate ending, and if you haven't seen it, which I'm surprised, but hey, you might not have gotten to this one, but very different ending for the alternate version, which again involves time travel that goes awry, much like in the beginning of the film. At the end of the film, he ends up far too far into the future, and very different end, very apocalyptic ending, and not quite as warm and fuzzy or fun as what we end up with in the theatrical release. But this was the first time you could get a really nice version to see. It's still a little dark and grainy because this is just, you know, just a transfer off a tape onto a DVD, but it's still, you know, this was the easiest way to access that. So that's a big deal. A couple of cool things I want to point out about the other people involved with making the film. It wasn't just three guys who made this movie, obviously. It's got a huge cast. A couple other important names I just want to throw out there. You will see predominantly on the poster the fact that the music is by Danny Elfman of Tim Burton fame, right? Yes, no, not quite. He wrote a theme that you hear when the Dead march, which is a great piece of music, but he did not in any way do the rest of the scoring of the film. He did one piece for them. But still pretty cool that it's there, but a little misleading at the time when you look at the advertising. So yeah, Danny Elfman did have a small part in making Army of Darkness, which is cool. Other people had a small part in making Army of Darkness. Bill Moseley of Texas Chainsaw 2 and House of a Thousand Corpses. He kind of ended up in this kind of like mutual admiration thing back and forth with Sam Raimi, and you know, I want to be in one of your pictures, I love Evil Dead 2. Sam has him come out, has him do the makeup, learn how to ride a horse, and he's basically barely used. But he is the head of the Deadite army. I think he has like one line in the film, but hey, at least he can say he got to be in a Sam Raimi film, and he was a big fan at the time, so that's cool. I think a lot of people know that one of the first real K&B films, K&B effects, one of the films that they made first was Evil Dead 2. That is like one of the first things that made them a company. So of course, all of them are totally on board and there, and they have a huge hand in making Army of Darkness even happen. So K&B Effects are on board, plus tons of other guys in that effects crew. multiple effects shops, and lots of extra workers to get out all the Deadite army and all the makeup appliances and special effects that you see. A very small portion of which is made by Tom Sullivan, who we will talk about when we talk about Evil Dead 1 and 2, who was instrumental in all of the special effects. He was the special effects crew for Evil Dead 1. He got to do, he's listed as animator on this one. He had a very small part in it, but it's still there, which is cool that he was even still around. One of these days over on my other show, Indie Called Horror, I'll get to share with you guys my interview with Tom Sullivan, and you can learn more about how that relationship happened. But hey, we'll get to that when we get to that. One other person I really wanted to point out is Bill Pope, the cinematographer. So Bill Pope made a lot of music videos. He's a cinematographer on this. He was a cinematographer on many music videos, including, which was probably most impressive to me at the time, was Metallica's Video 1, which is a very stylized shoot, so that's very cool that he was that guy. He also went to work on other Raimi films like Darkman and the Spider-Man movies 2 and 3. I believe he was the DP on, and then also he was one of the DPs on The Matrix, so that's pretty cool. A couple other names that are part of the kind of Raimi crew at this point. One person who makes an appearance, and I believe also ended up doing stunts kind of all over the place as one of the Deadites, is Patricia Tallman. She's the possessed witch, which is a pretty cool character that throws the cauldron and says the Deadite terms, out at Campbell. But she also, I think probably the way most of us really got to know Pat Tallman as horror fans is her portrayal of Barbara in the Night of the Living Dead remake by Tom Savini, which was pretty cool. She's a great person. She did a lot of Star Trek work over the years. Stuntwoman and actress who shows up in genre stuff all over the place. So it's cool that Pat Tallman is part of this. And of course, you can't have a Raimi movie without Ted Raimi. So infamously, Sam Raimi's younger brother Ted, who is Henrietta in part 2, he kind of shows up all over the place in this one. He's in the Deadite army, I believe, at some point. He's one of the kind of villagers, and then he's a soldier, and he kind of shows up a bunch of times. Pretty much whenever there's like, hey, we need somebody who's, hey, Ted, come over here. You be this guy. Okay, yeah. So Ted shows up quite a bit in this film as well, so that's cool. So let's talk about the Blu-ray. So, cool thing about the Blu-ray, I'm going to say, don't forget, it's a Shout Factory edition. Is this considered a Scream Factory? Yes, it's a Scream Factory, Shout Factory edition. This is the Super Collector's Edition, because this is the 3-disc Collector's Edition. And, I mean, when I say it's 3 discs, it's because it's 3 different cuts of the film, and they each get their own disc, which is pretty cool. There are extras on each disc as well. There's the theatrical, there's kind of the international market version, and there's the version with the alternate ending. Alternate ending, also known as the director's cut. So, this is pretty impressive to me. I literally watched all 3 discs because of how much I was just amazed at how great a quality everything is. And I mean, it's a film that I've seen a million times, but it had been a while enough that I kind of once every couple weeks broke out another disc and watched again. There's some carryover of the behind the scenes features in the the Anchor Bay version, but while they're still there, there's a lot of extensive stuff. There is a feature-length documentary by Red Shirt Productions that tells you everything about the making of this film. And I, someone who thought I knew a lot about Army of Darkness, I learned a lot on this disc. There's commentary tracks, there's trailers, there's deleted scenes, TV spots, alternate opening, not just alternate ending, so I'd never seen that before, I don't think. They like to call it the vintage making of, which is the Anchor Bay one. There's so much stuff on here. So Medieval Times is the name of the full-length feature making of. Highly recommend it. Anyone who's a fan of the Evil Dead series, Bruce Campbell, Raimi, all of that, KNB effects. Oh my god, to hear these guys talk about just throwing stuff together, and how crazy it was working with Sam Raimi. I mean, it's really just like a perfect love letter to fans everywhere of Army of Darkness and the Evil Dead films. So I'm going to say this is probably the most important version of Army of Darkness ever put out there for the public. So you really need to own this. That one. Oops, there it is. Yeah, I can't even think of anything else to say about how great it is except for the fact that you need it. Let's see. Feature length Tommy, over 20 interviews, including star and co-producer Bruce Campbell, actor Ted Raimi, Bill Moseley, Pat Tallman, and many more. Original ending, alternate opening, deleted scenes, theatrical trailers, TV spots, US video promo. It's just, it's beautiful. It's what it is. So, yeah, bye. One last note of cool people who kind of show up in Army of Darkness. If you're like me, and if you grew up a sci-fi geek, and if you were a sci-fi fan in the late 80s, and you were watching PBS so that you could see Doctor Who, then like me, Sylvester McCoy, that's your doctor. And one of my favorite episodes is Battlefield. That's the one where the kind of like time travel kind of all meshes together in this kind of intergalactic version of the Arthurian story. Comes to place in present day England, and there's artifacts involved, but basically you have Arthur fighting against Morgan. The guy who plays Arthur in this plays Arthur in this. They're both called Arthur. Neither of them are King Arthur, but hey, they're Arthur. That's pretty cool. So, I totally geeked out on that one. Yeah. Oh yeah. Big nerd. Alright guys. So, sum up, first episode of 2020. I totally love the Evil Dead films and Sam Raimi. I totally love Army of Darkness, and I think most of you do too. So, if you're not like me and old enough to have gotten the comic books when they came out, or hit the theater opening weekend to see Army of Darkness, and then when you got a Laserdisc player, went and found the Army of Darkness Laserdisc so you could have it to round out your collection, but you probably at least showed up in time for the Anchor Bay editions, then you really need to catch up, if you haven't already, and get the Shout Factory, Scream Factory Collector's Edition Special 3-disc version. Make sure it's the 3-disc one, because you want each cut to see the little itty bitty differences between them, because I know you're like me and you love them, but you're really going to want to see that feature-length documentary, so that you can learn everything there is to know about how cool Army of Darkness is. Alright, so Happy New Year, and this is the Horror Academic signing out. I'll see you next time.